a wider workshop that is happening this week. So for some people who have been listening into the workshop already, there might be some sort of repeat of information, but we wanted to have this short session so a wider group of people could join and get the latest information on what is happening with the CMIP forcing data sets, and also have the opportunity to ask some questions and provide feedback. So we will just run through a couple of kind of housekeeping on how the session's going to run. So we've got just a very short agenda. We'll be looking at the status of the CMIP6+ forcings, and then we'll have a question and answer. So in terms of housekeeping, we want just to highlight that everyone needs to make sure that we have a professional kind of and respectful approach to all our discussions, and we abide by the WCRP Code of Conduct. This drop-in session is being recorded, and the recordings will be published on the workshop website and on the CMIP website. So if you don't wish to appear in the video, please keep your video turned off. During the discussion, and if you're raising a question, it'd be great if you could turn your video on just so everyone can see you. But at other points and during the presentation, please feel free to turn it off. If you want to ask a question, can you please use the raise hand feature in WebEx? Or if you're having sound and connectivity issues, use the chat and put question and then your question. Please only use the WebEx chat if you have a question or you want to raise a technical issue. So what we have for the sort of wider discussion, or if you have some longer comments or questions, and this will allow all of the people in this room and online to also take part in being able to answer your questions, is to engage through a couple of Padlets that we've set up. You got the link in the drop-in session invite, but this is just a reminder here. There's a couple of QR codes as well. So on the left, we have one that is focused on the CMIP7 deck forcing suite. And then there's another one that if you want to add your thoughts on the next generation sustained mode forcing. So I'll just hand over now to our forcing task team co-leads, Vishali Naik and Paul Durack, and they are going to run through the presentation for you.
Great, thanks so much, Eleanor, and welcome to everyone who's joining. So we've got 54 people online and quite a number of people in the room. Just a calibration point. So none of this work could be done without everyone that's done work to date and who will hopefully continue to do work into the future. So many thanks to our forcing task team, participants and stakeholders and the modelling groups that are also engaging as well. And this is just a subsample of folks that are involved. Again, thank you so much to everyone who's been involved thus far, all the agencies that have funded the activities, and hopefully we can continue all that into the future. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about today is the status of these prototype forcings being prepared for CMIP7, and it's been determined as a CMIP6+ prototype collection. So next slide, please. And so what are we talking about when we're referring to CMIP6+? So there was a recognition during CMIP6 that once data was made available, it was used. And so what we thought about doing this time around was we're going to try and test data sets before we actually use these for prime time CMIP7 simulations. And that's where the CMIP6+ naming comes up. So there's a graphic on the right-hand side here which tries to break that down into simulations in the top in the blue there, and the forcing data sets that have been prepared for these simulations use. And basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to generate some forcing data sets in prototype mode, identify them as CMIP6+. If modelling groups want to pick these up and start to investigate how the models are responding to these prototype forcings, that would be great. Please do so as much as you can. And then if those data sets did want to get published, we could identify those as CMIP6+ forcing data sets. When we go through the testing phase, once we've resolved as many issues as we can, we'll then identify these data sets as their final versions for the CMIP7 fast track use. And the naming will be, it will change from CMIP6+ to CMIP7. And that will basically provide us with the forcing suite that will allow the deck simulations to commence. Next. Okay, great. So Where we are at the moment, you'll see this URL on the right-hand side here. This is just a snapshot of the table that's represented on the Forcings task team homepage, the available data sets. And we've got 10 data sets that are identified there, and about 7 of them at the moment that are, well, there's about 6, almost 7, that are available for groups to start looking at, investigate, and potentially start thinking about using them in simulations. And if we jump to the next slide, there's a bit more detail about this. So to try and reuse nomenclature that we generated in CMIP6, we're recognising that each one of these forcing data sets are evolving and being developed in an independent way. And so what we've come up with is a naming convention. Each one of these forcing data sets has a source ID, which includes a version identifier. And the point of this is that as each one of these data sets is generated, there will be issues that will be unique to a certain version. Hopefully we can identify these issues, we can then fix them, we can release a new version, and we continue that iterative process. So on the right-hand side there, just to try and demystify this somewhat, for the solar data set, the Solaris HEPA CMIP, we've had 3 data sets that have been published to the ESGF. Version 4.2 in the top there, that there was an issue that was identified with that. It was retracted, replaced with version 4.3. That was also found to have a minor issue, which was replaced again by 4.4. And so what we're trying to do is go through the process of using the ESGF publication process to capture issues, identify problems, get them fixed hopefully, and then have these data sets that are continuing to being updated over time. And so in general, what modelling groups will find is that as each one of the data sets is updated and the latest version is available, the previous version will be retracted and replaced with another one with some kind of identifier that indicates that it's the next generation. So from 4.2 to 4.3 to 4.4 with the solar data sets, for example. Because we've got this pipeline that we've got working at the moment, we've managed to find a number of issues with data sets before they've been published on the ESGF. So we've done some cleaning up before it even got, to the modelling groups to use, and some of those are highlighted in the in that second block underneath there. So we have web pages. A lot of the information is available on that GitHub link at the top there. So github.com/pcmdi/input for MIP CVs. And if you glance down on that README page, you'll see a number of links to much more detailed information. I'd like to point out Zeb Nichols for helping out a lot with trying to organise and coordinate this. And so it really is a work in progress, and we're hoping to try and capture as much interaction around this GitHub repo as possible. Next slide, please. So once the data sets are made available, they are published to the ESGF under the input for MIPS identifier, and the URL down the bottom there is how you can actually get access to this project. I would note that it's a federated project, which means that you could go to your favourite ESGF node at DCARZ, at CEDA, for example, and the same information will be available. And then that URL again for the GitHub repo where we're capturing information about these data sets that are being published into the ESGF. Next slide, please. So an important identifier here is the input from its project was available, it was spun up actually to serve the needs of CMIP6. And so in this project, we have 2 different variations of data sets. We've got the CMIP6 era forcing data sets that were finalised around about 2018. They're still published and available in the project. And we've got this new suite of data sets that are starting to become available now that's identified as this CMIP6 Plus identifier. You can toggle between the 2, so you can go and compare your data sets if you're interested. And as I said before, when we do actually get these finalised data sets that are ready for the fast track, there'll be a new identifier there, which will be the CMIP7. So you should be able to jump around the different era of the forcing data sets and compare and contrast, and everything will be available across the ESGF infrastructure. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to Vishali.
Sure. So with this slide or with this schematic, we just wanted to give you a view of the process or the workflow that we have taken to provisioning and testing of these forcings over the last 2 years, and in some cases, especially for our data providers, more than the last 2 years. So the green box basically highlights the back-end process of development of forcing data that our data providers take: scientific exploration, process development, including the use of observations, models, proxies, and then of course going through the whole peer review process. And then coming to the task team and uploading of the data, it begins with our data providers registering their source IDs to create the forcing data files, conforming to CMIP requirements, and iteration over this GitHub repo. So if you wanted to see a more detailed view of what goes on, into the back and forth that goes on, please feel free to get to that repo. So once all of the data gets to a point where it's ready to go up to be uploaded, it goes to ESGF input for MIPS. And then, therefore, it is shared widely, including modeling groups and wider user community. Then once the data is out there, our hope is that, and within the task team, of course, we look at the data and evaluate and test, but also with our fresh eyes on CMIP group, our early career scientists have been looking at the data and providing feedback, modeling groups and interested users. And so that feedback comes through this GitHub repo again, through the discussions link where there is discussion on the repo for individual data sets that we hope that the data providers then take and update their process and update the data set, address the issues, and then we go through this whole cycle again. So this iteration process helps to get to a point where we get to a finalized data set that has been reviewed, tested, and evaluated. So just to give you a very quick look on the on how the data might have changed, we'll just go through a few slides highlighting GHG concentrations and stratospheric aerosol, volcanic aerosol forcing. So here, two slides, plots from for CO2 and methane. Basically, the data, the greenhouse concentrations are stable and consistent with CMIP6. There is small differences for methane pre-1950 that needs further investigation. The data set has been extended to 2022. Similarly for N2O and for N2O, mostly stable 1850 onwards, but there are differences pre-1850 that needs further investigation. For CFC11 equivalent, there is striking difference between with comparison to CMIP6, and therefore there's an obvious bug there that will be addressed by our data provider, Zeb Nichols here. For volcanic forcings, the top plot shows the global mean stratospheric aerosol optical depth. The coverage of this data set has been extended from 2015 to go through, or from 1850 to 2015 versus 1750 to 2023. The 1850 to 2014 mean SAOD is very similar in CMIP6 plus as compared to CMIP6, 0.1 in CMIP6 plus versus 0.11 in CMIP6. The large magnitude eruptions before 1979, the forcings can differ significantly. And for smaller magnitude eruptions before 1979, there are some missing and some new eruptions. The SAOD perturbations, there were some unphysical time evolution of the SAOD perturbations, which are now absent in CMIP6+, and the latitudinal distribution shows some additional eruptions in CMIP6+, which will be evaluated further. Over to you, Paul.
So we've got a number of FAQs where we're trying to anticipate some questions before we start. So I might just work through those quickly, and then we'll open up for more questions as well. So the first one was, is there a document that provides more details on the data sets? We are planning on doing that. We've been having quite a number of discussions about how best to do that in the last couple of days. And we really are going to try and do that in a systematic way, again, trying to use this GitHub repo as a way of centralizing information. We do also have a GMD special issue on forcings focused on this CMIP7 preparation. And that is something that we would welcome actually contributions to, not only from the dataset providers, but also modelling groups that are evaluating some of the forcings. So please do keep a track on that. And there's this question of how will we communicate with the modelling centres and the users. So one of the ways that we're trying to centralise a lot of information, again, is in this GitHub repo. If you're familiar with GitHub, you're able to watch the repo, which means that you get dinged every single time something happens. Every single time we have a new data set, for example, that we're preparing for publication on ASGF, we're minting a new release. And so if you wanted that granular information, you can slice and dice whatever information you want via email. So again, these links, so the releases page in particular, provides some information as to how things have changed in the data sets. And if we've deprecated, for example, the previous version of the solar data set, this 4.3, as the 4.4 come along. And then again, trying to centralise discussions, particularly modelling groups that are picking up these data sets and starting to use them. We have a number of discussions that are open at the moment around a number of the data sets that are now available for evaluation. And quite a number of the forcing data set providers are also engaged in that discussion too. So one of the things that we're really trying to do this time around is centralise communications in an open forum, pull things out of inboxes. So it means that we can really try and do this in a way that enables folks to engage in the conversation now, or later if necessary, and it's all there preserved for access. Next slide, please. So this is the discussions page. Again, that URL at the top there. Please engage, pull these data sets down and start having a look at them. And if you've got questions, then feel free to engage in this. There's a number of different folks from modelling groups, for example, that have started to evaluate some of these data sets. And if you want to keep on track with what's going on with these things, you can engage in these discussions and join as part of the conversation as well. So just to try and indicate again, this concept of CMIP6+, at the moment, we're identifying the prototype data sets, these V0 versions. We did actually have quite a number of versions of the collection that was being used in CMIP6. There was actually 3 releases of the version 6 data sets back in CMIP6. And so the way we're trying to collect this information at the moment is we have each one of these forcing data sets that's starting to be generated. We're determining them to be effectively a collection. And we've got a version identifier within the input from MIPS-CV's web pages, for example, that will show that again. So we're trying to find as many issues and any issues that we can identify now, prioritise them to kind of get them fixed before we get these finalised versions ready for CMIP7. And then we will have the V1 or the version 7 collection that will be available next year again. So there's the URL again to download data sets through ASGF. And all the web links will be updated with the CMIP7 information as well. Next slide, please. So scenarios. Vishali, did you want to speak to this?
Sure. So when will scenarios be available? Based on our discussions with our scenario MIP colleagues and our scenario MIP harmonization work group, our scenario timeline looks like this. Until December, January, we'll get some new scenarios updates and iteration with IM teams on the format of the files will happen. January through May, the iterative process between harmonization teams and IM teams will occur, and the investigation of uncertainties, robustness, and exploring methods will happen over this first 6 months of next year. And by June, we'll have near final scenarios. And at that point, we'll also start harmonizing these scenarios and producing data sets to go on our ESGF. And on the plot on the right is just an illustrative CO2 emission scenarios from the scenario MIP group, showing the various different scenarios that are expected. All right, so I'm sure there are more questions, and there is a full list of FAQs that's available on our website with answers to more of your questions. And as you ask and come up with some more on the Padlet, all of those questions will go into this FAQs document that will be available, that is available and will be updated in prime time on this on our website as well. And with that, we come to our questions and answers section. And we end here. Thank you.
So if we've got any questions in the virtual audience or the audience in the room, feel free to raise your hand and raise any questions that you may have.
So there is a question online from Dave Lawrence. Are these slides available? These slides will be made available online very, very soon, and as well as the recording as well. Oh, Eleanor, thank you.
No questions? Everything was crystal clear? Oh, Matt, no?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the clear presentation. I just wanted to speak a little bit or make a suggestion with respect to the scenarios forcing timeline, because one of the things that are just the way that this process happened in CMIP6 is that we were quite a bit more siloed, I would say, in terms of the IAM team sort of going about and doing their own thing and taking their time and generating these data sets and then sort of chuck them over the fence. And I think we can do better. And I would suggest, this is from conversations with Yarmo and Zeb and Chris and others about like, how could we streamline this process a little better? Which is to actually identify perhaps one IAM team that is interested in sort of more actively working on this problem. Maybe one ESM team who would be interested in running early test simulations, and to really sort of have a tighter group that sort of iterates on that full sort of, end-to-end pipeline on the data sets, such that when it's finally time to deliver the final scenario data sets, we are highly confident that they're basically turnkey ready to go, and at least there's a minimum one ESM, but then of course any additional number of ESMs who are interested in participating, who sort of put their stamp of approval and say, we've tested these, we know that they work in our system, et cetera. But that was something that I think is a strong lesson learned from CMIP6 on our side.
I see Colin's got his hand up. Did you want to speak to that, Colin?
Yeah, sure. I want to strongly agree with Matt on that. I think so in CMIP6, it was actually the harmonization step, particularly things like land use and between the historical and the future scenarios that really was very, very badly delayed last time. So any way we can improve that and get a better streamlined system from start to end being using it in an Earth system model, I think that's a really good suggestion. And I think we would be happy to be one of those groups that tests scenario emission data in our Earth system model. So I just support it. Yep.
Thanks for that, Colin. That sounds great. So there you go. You got the first adopter. Isla, you had some questions as well. Did you want to grab the mic?
I may have missed this at the beginning. I was just asking about the timeline for the short-lived climate forcers. The website says expected October. Is that still the case?
Those data sets, the good news is that Steve actually found a bug that he's trying to fix at the moment. And so that data set was going to be available before the meeting, but it's now currently being finalised for after the meeting. The expectation will be that'll be available in early November, unless Steve wants to highlight any other delays that are popping up. The advantage is that we're doing a far better job this time around of trying to catch things before they become something that a modelling group kind of trips over as you're trying to implement the forcing data set in the model. So this is an iterative process, and the more engagement and feedback and review that we can actually get, the better off this is going to be, I think.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Gareth, did you want to come in with your question? Okay. The question is, will there be any early preprints for data sets, in particular for those that are quite different to what we had for CMIP6?
Preprints relating to what? To the data sets? Or?
I'm not quite. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm not quite sure.
Gareth, can you clarify the question if you don't mind? Because we're trying to understand what the preprints mean. Does that mean preprints of the data set descriptive papers? So the forcing dataset descriptive papers, or
Before the GMT papers come out.
sorry, contextually, I'm having trouble trying to follow what the question actually is. If someone wants to grab the microphone, that would be preferred actually, because we're trying to follow things in the chat and it's a bit difficult. Dave, Isla, if you want to grab the mic. Or Colin's got his hand up again, I think.
Shall I just go?
Yeah, mine's about something else.
I'll just read my comment real quick. Just asking to frequently update the website when the dates change. That's pretty helpful for us because I'm going back and checking fairly frequently, and you know, we're always making plans, and it helps to know accurately when data sets are going to come out. So
Thanks for the feedback. We're trying to update the web page as quickly as we can. We're not quite in November, so for that reason, optimistically. Okay, sorry. So yeah, we're trying to keep this information as live as we can. The SEDS data set is something that's been actively worked on at the moment, so hopefully that's going to be available soon. I've said that before though. So I don't know if Steve's got an update for us.
Yeah, sure. Again, yeah, basically we're working on one thing is fixing the aircraft seasonality so that the COVID dip is in the right place and improvements in the rest of the aircraft seasonality. So because the aircraft is 3D emissions, that's a separate chunk of code that processes that. So that didn't get rolled into our previous seasonality update. So that's the final bit we're working on, and it's being worked on right now. So it'll be we'll be regenerating that data any day now, get that to SGF and get that published. And of course, some of the key ESGF people are traveling, like the one you're looking at on the screen. So that's delaying the process. You know, yeah, that would delay it a day or so, but yeah, that's not their fault, it's ours.
Yeah, so trying to clarify, I think Gareth's question was documenting the data sets. We're learning by doing before documentation is written, actually, because I mean, many of these data sets, as Steve kind of indicated, are a work in progress. As we get more eyeballs on these data sets, we might find issues that need to be resolved. And so the papers would be finalised, I think, once we've actually got versions that we're ready to use in the simulations. And so that would be next year. And so, Gareth, if you're interested, I'd suggest you pull down some data sets and start having a look, because you might find some areas that are actually something we can identify and fix before, you know, that GMD article is finalised and published.
And thank you, Tom. You're already responding to that as well. So yeah, I think this is mostly pertaining to the documentation of the data sets as they come on, better understanding you know, what the changes are, and that of course helps the modelers for implementing the data sets as well. So yeah, it's all in works in progress. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but preferably if you actually want to raise your hand and grab the mic. So I think we've got Christian actually.
Maybe we'll let Tom go first. And
Sorry,
then,
yeah, good point.
Yeah, I would just follow up on Gareth had a follow-up question on the volcanic data set is quite different between 1950 and 1980. So the reason for that is pre-satellite era, we are now fully emission driven, whereas in CMIP6, for the few very big eruption, it was emission driven, and the rest mostly had no data or was relying on P-radiometer measurement, which were quite sparse and uncertain. No claim that our data set is better. It's just a different methodology to make it pre-satellite.
thank you, Tom. We have Heather. And then Steve has his hand up.
Hi. Actually, before I say my question, maybe a point related to Gareth. I think Paul mentioned a Zenodo document as well. Would that provide some more information before the GMD papers?
More of an overview, but maybe the details would come a little bit later. But the Zenodo document is more of a technical documentation. Does that help?
Technical on like formats and variables, right? Not technical as in science.
No, yes. Not technical as in science, yes.
But I guess it could be a place where some, if the data set was quite different, there could be just a note there about it. That may be possible.
I'll let answer a little bit more. Zeb?
Yeah, I had a few comments, but I'll stick to docs. So I think at the moment where there's different levels of documentation you can imagine, right? A paper is obviously a huge lift. What we don't have is even just like each data provider spends 15 minutes after they've published just being like, here are the key things you should know about. Here's how it differs from my previous version. We want to pull that up, and I think we want to stick that onto our read the docs page, which you can get to from the GitHub page. And I think that will hopefully really reduce the lift, and we'll get, a big win for relatively little effort. And then we'll have to see when the GMD papers come out. There's a Zenodo document we've been talking about, doesn't exist yet. So I think the idea is that basically we can obviously put our docs on Zenodo as well. You kind of put the information in two places. I don't know if that's that helpful, but if we really want to do it, we can. It's not that hard to automate. So yeah, I think it's definitely a job for us as the Forcings task team for the next 2 months, is to just get something that's like a super easy lift for us, but gives an entry point for everyone else.
I could give my question now.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess we had some discussion about uncertainty. So I was just wondering if there was any recommendation about how to communicate that, if that would just be part of the publications, or maybe would we also accept additional data sets that would be more kind of numerical uncertainties that might have different temporal or spatial characteristics?
Yes, I'll just respond to that. I mean, the conversation we've had the last couple of days, uncertainties are something that we've not really done very well in capturing previously in forcing data sets, yet they exist, and we know about them now. Probably known about them for quite some time, but we've not done anything about them before. One of the things that's been discussed here is to try and figure out, is there a way of quantifying what that uncertainty is? It's a hard problem. It's also dependent upon the forcing data set. As an example that did come up earlier today, in the land use changes, for example, there was a low and a high scenario that was provided alongside the, the median estimate. I don't think that was readily used in CMIP6 as much as it could have been. But if there's an appetite for modelling groups to actually have that kind of information, then I think it's possible to do that. It's just that we've already got a number of forcing data set providers that are pretty stretched to do what they're already trying to do. But I mean, if there's an appetite for, for modelling groups to start investigating the forcing uncertainty, I think that's something that definitely could be done on a longer time frame, pending the fact that everyone's pretty busy at the moment. But I mean, the appetite is definitely something that would be good to gauge.
So, but could we submit it like an additional data set to input for MIPS, that's the uncertainty, or is that?
100%. Yeah, I mean, so what happened in the past, we can do that again. We'd have to uniquely identify the data set. So for example, in the case of that CMIP6, there was a low and a high in addition to the median scenario. We could totally do that. If there are additional forcing data sets, for example, biomass burning is one of the ones we're having discussions about, an alternative data set, we could definitely kind of capture that. Other forcing data sets that we've never included in the past and will not be part of the fast track deck forcing collection, we could also collect that too. So, I mean, the input from its project can technically publish anything that is available. The only thing is that if people wanted to provide an additional forcing data set, in addition to a core data set, we'd have to make sure that we document what that is and provide guidance to modelling groups as to how much attention to pay to these different data sets and how to use them as well. So if you wanted to do that, Heather, be my guest. We can technically do that, but it's a commitment that you're going to be making with potentially a lot of questions coming from modelling groups. So very much welcome it. We're technically ready to do that. It's just that if there's a willingness to actually step up and do that work, that's basically a question to you, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe we could also, when people are doing their publications, to try to encourage them to address uncertainty, and especially if there are differences with CMIP6 to say whether those are significant or if they're within the actual uncertainty that we judge to be real for that particular variable.
I think in some of the discussions already, we've got some difference plots between CMIP6 and these updated data sets. And I think that's exactly the first point, to try and figure out, was this just an artifact of a data set that didn't have quite as much scrutiny in CMIP6? Is it a methodology difference, as Thomas has indicated with volcanics? Have we done a better job this time around? Probably. Is there more room to do a better job and actually, quantify uncertainty? I think that's also definitely something that could be done. But again, how this is going to be done, technically we can capture, much information, but we would need to make sure that we've got clear engagement with modelling groups who are interested in investigating this too. So I think it would be a good thing to do longer term for sure. So I think we've got Christian as well. So.
Yes, thanks a lot. At which point of time will be updates to the PI control setup and forcing definition, if there will be any?
Sure. So I guess the question you're asking is the protocol, the PI protocol, will that, if there is a change coming up, at what point it might come? Is that the question?
Yes. For example, also greenhouse gases. I see there are some differences in some constituents on your timeline. I do not know whether they will reflect in the PI control setup and forcing definition, or whether it will stay like in CMIP6.
Yeah. So our expectation to finalize the deck forcings is sometime, the historical deck forcings, including the PI control, is early 2025. So that's when, by January, February is when we'll have our protocol mostly set, as well as our forcings data set finalized, barring any other issues that are found later on. But we hope to have things ready by early 2025. That would be a January, February timeframe.
And I'll just chime in on that too. The more evaluation we can do at this very moment in, early November, for example, the better those data sets are going to be. The experience in CMIP6 was we stopped and started a number of times over about a 6-month period. It would be better to do that kind of evaluation now, fix the problems that, potentially we're going to encounter if we don't do the work now, and then get things finalised in early 2025 without having to stop and restart again. So Christian, if you want to pick up these data sets and start looking at them, very much welcome to do that.
I think it was mainly a comment on the provision of uncertainties. We need to be clear as well that certainly in the early stages, the provision of some kind of uncertainty information doesn't imply that it will be run through a climate model. It can function just as much as a sanity check. And so it doesn't have to be a complete data set. We had a thread about documentation, and in the very early stages, the uncertainty is as much a documentation question as anything else. So let's start small and build and be clear, we're not implying additional model runs at this stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not really replying to uncertainties. I guess I had one comment on timeline and maybe also to dovetail in. So we're talking about historical and PI control freezing in Jan-Feb, that sort of timeline. And then, I think yesterday you were saying that we think if we can get final scenarios from IAMs, probably July is when we'd have final gridded data to run through. And I think that works for most of the forcing providers. Louise, looking at you, you're nodding, good. And there's obviously one it doesn't work for at the moment. So maybe it's worth A, clarifying that timeline, but B, Paul, I think it might be worth you running us through again just this CMIP6 plus versus CMIP7 switch, how that's going to work and how we're going to try and do version numbers and stuff like this. Because at the moment, if you look down this list, it goes like V1, V4, V03, V119. So that's definitely not helping us. So the question is how are we going to make sure that it's easy for people to find one or the other? And I think you have a solution, maybe just worth going through it again.
Paul, may I suggest that we go through Dave and Steve and then come to that question, because it's obviously a longer answer. Oh, and Colin as well. So calling those, yeah, go ahead.
Well, my question was about the readiness of the PI control forcing, so that's already been addressed. But that's the number one data set we need before anything else as a modeling group.
Dave?
Steve was ahead of me, so.
Okay, Steve, sorry.
Yeah, so the one quick thing, I actually just posted on the CMIP7 Padlet some links that show the comparisons we already have posted on how this latest data sets differ with CMIP6. So so that should help answer some of those questions. In relation to one of the questions, I think gridded data in July is, well, if we really use all the updated data we have, that's probably a bit ambitious because we'll just be able to produce new emissions out to 2024 at the beginning of July. So, you know, even if we have all the process worked out, having all that data done and available and vetted in 3 weeks might be a bit much. But and that there's a little bit of an open, you know, maybe we don't use the most recent data, but we would like to. So there's that sort of open question on timeline.
Thank you, Steve. Dave?
Yeah, somebody mentioned biomass burning, and I guess you've been talking about it most likely, but and everyone's aware of the issue of switching between smooth, you know, pre-satellite forcing going to internally varying forcing, then back to smooth. And I think I've heard that CMIP 6 plus and 7 is going to stick with that. I'll just say CSM will not use that data set for sure then, because we've seen a very distinct impact of having that transition between smooth and variable forcing. So maybe just stating publicly so you know that that's what we'll do. We're actually hoping to run with interactive emissions anyway, but that's only a 50-50 chance at this point. So anyway, just a comment. If there was a parallel if there was a parallel smooth data set, we would use that if you wanted to. Otherwise, we'll create it probably.
Thanks, Dave. Isla?
Just with this discussion of the PI control, now I'm wondering, so if we were going to be testing what's available now, do you recommend running the PI control with the 1850s values? That seems like it would be a bit different for like volcanic, which presumably the actual forcing data set for the PI control would be some kind of baseline as opposed to that individual year.
Yes, and we would not recommend running any production PI control runs with CMIP 6 plus forcings, given that they are still going through revisions. It's only once we've finalized and moved to the CMIP 7 version 7 collection, that's when we would want the modeling centers to pick those on and run with them. And maybe your question will be better answered with the answer from Paul to Zeb's questions.
Yeah, so thank you for prompting me, Zeb. I think you're right. So I'm trying to just go through this. So the simple reality is we've got quite a number of different forcing data sets that are coming down the pipe, and every single one of those is produced by a different data set provider. And each one of these are being done on their own timescale. And so importantly, we have a data set. So on the right-hand side there, you've got the Solaris HEPA, for example. That's the Solaris HEPA CMIP data set, the historical data set. And we've had a number of versions in which Bernd and his team have gone and found problems, fixed them, found problems, fixed them. Version 4.4, that bottom one there, Solaris HEPA CMIP 4.4-4 is the latest version. That is going to happen for every single forcing data set that we collect. And if Heather's aspiration to generate multiple data sets is realised, that's going to broaden from 10 to 20 whatever data sets as well. So the way that we need to think about this is every single data set is a unique product that will have its own unique version number. And then when we get to the final kind of point that we have this version CMIP7 collection, that collection will then be identified with each one of the versions of the sub-products underneath it. That is a collection. This happened again in CMIP6, and so we had a version 6 collection that was then 6.1 collection, and that was 6.2 collection, and we found issues as we went along. we're catching a lot of problems right now, which means that hopefully we're not going to go through that, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. But we are doing a better job of communicating this time around. Having said all that, this is science at the interface. And so the more evaluation that we can get done before we get to that, that CMIP7 cutoff, the better off we're going to be. And so again, these data sets, there's 6 data sets, and there should be very soon 7 data sets available for modelling groups to pick up and start looking at. We've got the GitHub discussions at the moment, which have identified quite a number of things that we're kind of keeping track of for land use, for biomass burnings, for greenhouse gases, etc., concentration, getting part into that discussion and starting to evaluate these data sets alongside the data providers, the fresh eyes, and the other folks that are looking at this would be really quite helpful. But hopefully that actually makes a bit more sense. Zeb, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that makes life slightly easier. So on the SGSGF, there's this idea of a MIP era, and that's one of the search fields. Everything in CMIP6+ is testing. Do not start your final simulations on something which is CMIP6+. Only once it's got a MIP era of CMIP7, then it's the final thing. I think that's the very simple toggle to look at, which is probably the one thing we haven't mentioned earlier.
Sophie, yeah, Isla, feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, my question wasn't so much about production runs, but for like testing these data sets right now. I mean, it seems like we have a couple of options. Like we have to start from somewhere, right? From a pre-industrial control, and we could start from a pre-industrial control that's using CMIP6 pre-industrial forcings, or we could start from a pre-industrial control that's using some kind of average, like 1850 from these new forcings that are available. I'm just wondering if there's a recommendation of which of those to do for just testing purposes.
The point I think has been made a couple of times is at the moment we're in a testing phase. So, I mean, I would not start production runs from anything at the moment because we've not gotten to the end of it, at the end of the process of generating the data sets. The way that the PI control forcing data sets for the most part that will be generated is we'll have a historical time period that will then be finalised, and then from that we'll come up with some climatological average for the case of volcanic forcings or whatever. Things like greenhouse gas concentrations are pretty stable, but some of these other things at the moment are a live discussion as to how we do things. At this moment, there is no protocol changes that are being recommended, although things are being discussed to try and figure out if there are any implications for the protocol. But the final data sets are not actually in place to generate things like the climatological average for volcanic, for the PI control. And so I would engage in discussion around this. We've got discussion, for example, on a number of data sets in the GitHub repo. That would be where I'd engage if I was a modelling group to try and familiarise themselves with some of the issues or the differences, for example, and how that could actually impact a simulation. Did you want to come back to that, Isla?
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood. I was under the impression that there was a desire for some modelling groups to try out some of these version 0 forcing data sets in the model just to, check for any showstoppers. Is that incorrect?
No, absolutely. If you want to do that, absolutely. The only thing is that these are testing. So, I mean, I wouldn't start production, quote unquote, runs with these data sets. I'd very much use them to try and evaluate if there's any changes that your model's seeing from different forcing data sets. I don't know if that's consistent with what you just said.
It is. My question was, to do that, we need to start from a pre-industrial control. But I think we could just start from the CMIP6 pre-industrial forcings and then spin up a pre-industrial control and then test some of these historical forcings from that.
What would I'd say, just to try and just make things as simple as possible, we've got CMIP6 forcing data sets that are sitting literally next door to the CMIP6+ forcing data sets. If I was a modelling group before I started a simulation, I'd go and evaluate what the differences are, actually. And then you could pretty quickly try and ascertain whether the CMIP6 initialisation versus the CMIP6+ initialisation is going to change things very much. Now, having said that, maybe that's not what NCAR wants to do, but that is the way that my head thinks.
Okay, thanks.
Colin?
Yeah, just carrying on the theme of the pre-industrial forcing. So we also tend to use pre-industrial forcing to spin up our models if they're new models. Obviously, we can start that with a CMIP6 pre-industrial forcing, but for a long simulation with spin up, a very small difference in the forcing can create a large difference after 1,000 years of spin up. So a settled pre-industrial forcing is really important to get as early as possible, I guess is all I'm pushing for. It's significantly more important in the calendar sense of how we do things than the historical forcing. Now, I appreciate the historical forcing might be a precursor for a settled pre-industrial, but from the modeling side, we need the pre-industrial to be settled in advance, some way in advance of the historical, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, in order to come up with a climatological average in the case of volcanoes, for example, you need the historical data set to be set. Having said all that, it depends on the time period over which you're generating the climatology. So totally recognise that PI controls need to start as soon as possible. But from a production point of view, the only way we can get to a PI control is to have a stable historical. And then once we have that, we can then quickly mint, a climatological average for volcanoes, for example. So there's time pressure. We're trying to do the best that we can. I know everyone's under time pressure, but we are really trying to push pretty hard to try and fix as many issues as we can up front so that you don't get into a situation where, you start with something that then wildly changes underneath you and you've got to restart your simulation again. So we're trying to do the best that we can. Dave, I think your hand's up too.
Just continuing on this point, I don't see why you couldn't produce the climatological forcings from this uncertain solar or volcanic, whatever you have to do it for, because I think it'd be easier for the modeling centers to be evaluating this if we had even an example pre-industrial to start with, because that's how we build our models up. So I don't know if it's too late in the game to change that process, but if you could be releasing this, what you think a best guess climatological values are for pre-industrial at the same time as releasing the transient, and then if those have to both get updated, that's okay. We'd rather have that they both get updated rather than having to figure out how to create those data sets ourselves or switch between CMIP6 and CMIP6 Plus. So,
right. So at the moment, we do have solar forcing data sets for pre-industrial control uploaded on ESGF, so that could be tested. GHGs, you just need the 1850 values, so that could be tested. Volcanic forcings are a little bit different, and actually they are very different from what was done in CMIP6, and that is something that we, our session this morning where we discussed the protocol for CMIP7 CMIP7 deck simulations, and that we've had discussions, we've collected information. We need to go back and process all of that and come back with you to our core panel to make a recommendation for our what the protocol should be. Should it be the same as CMIP6, meaning historical mean over 1850 to 2022? Or should it differ from based on the discussions we've had this morning? So it's all in the process, and of course we totally understand the time pressure here. So definitely, I think you can start with what is already there, but with the unclear understanding that volcanic forcings may likely change for pre-industrial, and our target date, of course, remains that by early next year, finalizing the historical forcing, which then gets us to the pre-industrial control forcings as well.
great, thank you. If any of that discussion can get into the GitHub, that'd be, you've had this meeting, that'll help us track as well.
Absolutely, yes. I think Steve and then Gavin.
I don't know if you mentioned this, Paul, before, but I just found it. The link to the GitHub is on the Forcing Task Team's homepage. So, if nobody wants to search through slides on it, it is there for the discussions and so on. So, second question, Paul, do you also have a slide on the new forcing, like historical future protocol? Because that would be good to discuss in this session.
Sorry, Steve, I wasn't paying attention. Could you repeat that last point?
I want to see if we have a slide in this session on the new historical future split protocol. The same slide you had for the first session yesterday would work.
I can pull it up. Is that the timeline one, Eleanor?
It's slide 24 if it's this one.
Oh, okay. Is that
one?
Yeah. Okay.
Paul, you want to take this one?
Sure, Steve. I'm more than happy to take this one. So the time period for the historical experiment is 1850, and that's locked in. The end of that is something that at the moment we're trying to ascertain. So the thing is that we have a number of forcing data sets at the moment that extend through 2022 or 2023. One of the things that we've been discussing is the uncertainty around the data sets. And so particularly with the emission inventories that Steve can speak to far better than I can, the closer that you get to real time, the more uncertain that the estimates actually become, because the inventories take some time to actually find their way into the SEDS archive, which then is what the data sets are generated from. And so there's two things that we're thinking about here: the end of the historical period, which is then needing to be harmonised with the scenarios. And so at the moment, this is a live discussion, but what we're trying to ascertain is when will the historical simulations end as a recommendation. We then start a harmonisation period, which is a 5-year period between scenarios. And then the scenarios would start diverging from, say, 2025, which is what we're thinking about at this moment here. So the IAMs that generate the scenarios, the time steps is 5 years. And so we've got this kind of harmonisation period that's a window of 5 years. 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24, with 25 being the first step change in each one of these different scenarios, you know, low, mid, high, etc. If modelling groups wanted to temporarily extend their historical experiment to in real time or to near real time using the more uncertain forcings, the idea has been that we've actually got a simulation identity that exists that could be used, which is this historical X, or in the case of an ASM, it could be ASM-HIST-X. And that means that we've actually got this granularity in being able to separate between the historical and the and these kind of prototype, less certain data sets, forcing data sets. Steve, did I articulate that clear enough?
Yeah, let me just restate something in a different way. So basically, the idea is that the historical simulations stop in 2021, and all the future scenarios start in 2022, but they will have a few years of common data in all the future scenarios. And that gives us some extra time to solidify that data. And if you're saving restart files from 2021, next year, and this has been a request we've had repeatedly, then we can produce an extension anchored to that same 2020 starting point that goes to 2025. And the year after that, we can do a new extension to 2026 so that we can make better use in the near term of the CMIP simulations that you've all done.
Thank you, Steve. We are running out of time, so maybe Gavin, and then we'll end.
Okay, just a very quick point. The holdup with the SEDS data appears to be something to do with aviation and seasonality of aviation, which obviously is not really relevant for the pre-industrial. So given that that is a bit of a bottleneck, can the pre-industrial parts of the dataset be released ahead of time before you deal with the airline issues, so that people can start the pre-industrial controls or start looking at that?
Steve, did you want to take that?
I think that's also more of a question, Paul. I mean, it's available, and we're expecting this to be out next week. And of course, the anthropogenic pre-industrial is pretty small. It's really the biomass burning that's going, and the volcano, everything else that's going to matter more. But yeah, I mean, if somebody wants it a week ahead of time, let me know. I can send you a link.
So with that, next week, our SLCF emissions are coming. And with that, thank you so much. We want your feedback, we want more questions, and we want more discussions on the GitHub. So please feel free to keep engaging with us and get us to the start of the pre-industrial control CMIP7. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All the slides and the links to the videos, the GitHubs, etc., will be sent out to you later today and made available on the web page as well. Okay, so we're now going to move on with the next session of the wider workshop.